I sit alone in the living room of my house in West Hills, Portland. Morning light spills through the floor-to-ceiling windows, sliding across polished marble and catching on the edges of framed architectural prints. 10 years ago, this level of stillness would have felt foreign to me. Today, it feels like armor. The security monitor hums softly in the corner of the room. A soft chime cuts through the quiet. The gate camera flickers on. On the screen stands a woman with blonde hair, faded at the edges, wrapped in an oversized coat, despite the mild Oregon spring. For a moment, I do not move. My eyes fix on the familiar tilt of her chin. Vivian Hale, my stepmother. The woman who laughed as red wine soaked my wedding dress. The woman who called me invisible in my own home. My chest tightens in a way I have not felt in years. She presses the intercom. Her voice comes through the speaker distorted and raw. "Ember, please listen to me. I need your help." I lean back in the chair, hands resting on the armrests like a queen on a private throne. 10 years of silence unravel inside me. I can almost smell the vineyard air from that day in 2015. I can almost feel the fabric sticking to my skin. A sharp flicker runs through my stomach, not pain exactly, but something colder. The security guard steps into frame beside her, glancing toward the camera for instructions. I keep my voice steady. "Hold position. Do not open the gate." Vivian looks up at the camera as if searching for a face. Her hands clutch the metal bars like someone who has already lost too much. There is a tremor in her posture. Once, long ago, I would have rushed to fix everything. That girl is gone. My reflection in the glass is a woman who built her own empire while they turned their backs. The sound of a passing car drifts from the street below. Vivian steps closer to the speaker again. "Ember, please. We have nowhere else to go." My thumb brushes against the sleek remote on the coffee table. I could let her in. I could hear her out. I could also close the monitor and go back to the world I built without her. A memory rises without permission. The white silk of my dress. The cold red splash of wine, her laugh like a blade. A room full of people watching me burn while she smiled. She has not seen me since that night. Not through years of building Hale & Co. designs. Not when my name began appearing on the covers of design magazines. Not when I signed the final mortgage papers for this $6 million house. But she is here now because she needs something. Because the world she chose has collapsed around her. She is not here for love. She is here because I have what she wants. I look at the security guard through the intercom feed. "Maintain the gate." He nods without question. Vivian's lips keep moving, but I lower the volume. Silence fills the room again, the kind of silence that feels earned. My pulse is calm. 10 years ago, I would have been shaking. Now, I am steady. A knock at the gate is not the same as a knock on my heart. This is the moment everything turns. She is standing out there because of what she did, because of what she thought I would never become. I lean forward and rest my elbows on my knees. For the first time, I let myself really look at her face. The perfect hair is gone. The makeup is uneven. There is a tiredness in her eyes that no performance can hide. I feel no pity. Only clarity. The camera zooms slightly as she steps back from the gate. My security guard remains still. She glances around, perhaps realizing the cameras are watching every second. I press the screen lightly, leaving the video feed open, but muted. This is not a surprise. This is the inevitable return of someone who once believed she would always hold the upper hand. I have waited a decade for this moment without even meaning to. It feels like the air before a storm, sharp, charged, clean. If the woman who humiliated me at my own wedding stands outside my gate today, begging for my help, then everything has already changed. If someone once shattered your most important day and then returned years later to stand outside your house, what would you do? I grew up in Salem, Oregon, in a house that always felt like someone else's. My father owned a small construction business and spent most of his time either at job sites or at the kitchen table buried in invoices. He remarried when I was 8. That was the year the air inside our home changed. Vivian Hale moved in with her daughter Tara and rearranged everything, not just the furniture, but the way we existed. She painted the walls cream and put new curtains on every window. She replaced the family photos with pictures of herself and Tara smiling on a beach vacation they took before they ever met us. My old room stayed the same, but everything else turned into a stage where I was an extra. At first, I tried to please her. I said yes to every suggestion. I learned how to fold napkins into perfect triangles because she liked that. It didn't matter. She would look at me and find something to correct. Tara, on the other hand, could set fire to the kitchen, and Vivian would call it creativity. Tara was 2 years older with a sharp laugh that carried through the walls. She was used to being adored. I was used to being overlooked. One birthday stands out. I was 12. I sat on the porch waiting for my father to come home. Vivian had said they were going to a dance competition for Tara, and they would celebrate my birthday the next day. They never did. I blew out the candle on a cupcake I bought with my own babysitting money. When they finally came home that night, Vivian talked about Tara's trophy like it was gold from heaven. My father ruffled my hair absent-mindedly and went upstairs to shower. That was the rhythm of my childhood. Tara won. Vivian celebrated. My father went quiet, and I learned to disappear. High school only sharpened the edges. Vivian controlled the family finances. My father's paychecks passed through her hands before anyone else's. She told me college was a luxury, and if I wanted it, I needed to work for it myself. I started working part-time at a local bookstore when I was 16. Every Friday, I watched her write a check for Tara's dance lessons and new costumes, while I counted out my hours and minimum wage bills to pay application fees. She never yelled. She didn't have to. Her disapproval was a cold weight in the air. She liked power quiet like a hand pressing on the back of my neck. My father never challenged her. He would sit at the dinner table with his coffee nodding at whatever Vivian said. Once, I asked him why he let her decide everything. He said she was better at organizing. It was the easiest way to explain giving up. The night of my high school graduation, Tara had a regional competition. They didn't come. I stood on the field in my green cap and gown, scanning the bleachers, telling myself I didn't care. A friend's mom took a picture of me because no one else did. That photograph is still tucked in a drawer in my office today. Not because I need the memory, but because it reminds me where I started. At 18, I got accepted to the University of Oregon on scholarship. Vivian told my father it was unnecessary. She said I would end up back home anyway. She didn't know that her underestimation was the sharpest fuel. I packed my bags with no help from anyone and left that house before sunrise. As the car engine started, I looked up at my bedroom window. Tara's light was still on. She was probably texting her friends about another competition. I promised myself that morning that I would never come back to live under that roof. That promise became the quiet thread running under everything I did afterward. During college breaks, when most people went home, I stayed on campus. I worked at coffee shops. I saved every dollar. I learned how to keep a roof over my head without depending on anyone. Vivian sent me an occasional birthday card that always mentioned Tara's achievements first. I stopped opening them after a while. My father would call once a month. Our conversations were shallow and brief. He would ask about classes and then drift into silence like he was afraid to say something Vivian might overhear. I grew up understanding that some houses do not protect you. Some houses teach you how to protect yourself. By the time I finished college, I had built a version of myself that existed without their approval. Still, when I think back to that porch on my 12th birthday, when I sat alone with a melting cupcake, I can feel the exact shape of the silence they left around me. It is that silence that followed me into adulthood. It taught me how to stand alone, and later how to build something no one could take away. I remember sitting on the roof one night when I was 15. The neighbors across the street were having a barbecue. Their yard glowed with warm light, their laughter carried through the summer air. Inside our house, Vivian had turned off the lights early so Tara could rest for a competition the next day. I looked at the neighbors and whispered to myself that one day I would build my own place full of light where no one's approval decided who mattered. That night, I understood something no 15-year-old should have to learn. Family can be a prison or a foundation. Vivian turned ours into walls. I decided I would make my own key. That memory became the spine of everything I did afterward. I stopped waiting for them to notice me and started building the version of me they would never be able to ignore. Years later, when Vivian stood at my gate begging, she was standing in the shadow of the promise I made on that roof. The air in Willamette Valley carried the kind of sweetness that only comes from early summer. Rows of vines stretched toward the hills, and sunlight slipped through like threads of gold. It should have been perfect. I was 25 and standing in a bridal suite with a white dress carefully pinned and pressed a lace veil floating behind me like a promise. Outside, guests gathered on white wooden chairs beneath strings of warm lights. A quartet played softly, their music drifting through the open windows. This was supposed to be the day everything changed. Liam Carter, the man I loved, waited for me at the end of the aisle. I had chosen the venue because it felt like something I built, not something borrowed from the family that never wanted me to shine. But I had underestimated Vivian's talent for turning joy into a performance she controlled. She had insisted that Tara would be my maid of honor. She framed it as a family gesture, but everyone knew what it really was. Tara had spent weeks treating the wedding like it was her own runway. I had tried to keep the peace. I told myself it was only one day, that nothing could ruin the moment I walked toward Liam. I was wrong. I remember standing at the top of the steps as the doors opened and every guest turned toward me. For a brief second, I felt something close to weightlessness. The dress fit perfectly. My shoes didn't pinch. Liam's eyes locked on mine, steady and kind, like they always were. Then Vivian stepped out from the side. She held a glass of red wine. She smiled in the way only she could, as if the world existed for her amusement. The moment stretched thin. She tilted her hand. The wine spilled in a slow, brutal arc across the white silk of my dress. Gasps erupted from the rows of guests. I felt the fabric cling to my body. The red spread like a wound. Vivian laughed. Not loud, but sharp enough to cut the air. "Tragic, isn't it?" she said, her voice low but clear enough for those nearest to hear. She didn't stumble. She didn't pretend it was an accident. She made sure everyone saw what she wanted to do. Tara covered her mouth and laughed into her hand. My father stood behind them silent, his hands in his pockets like this was a passing cloud instead of a storm. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I stared at the stain spreading down the front of the dress I had spent months choosing. All around me, people whispered. Some reached forward as if they could fix it. No one could. Vivian had chosen her moment well. She wanted me to feel small when every eye was on me. I could feel the hot sting behind my eyes, but I refused to give her that satisfaction. I straightened my shoulders. I looked at Liam. His eyes were steady. He gave the smallest nod, a promise that I wasn't alone, but even that couldn't drown out the burn of humiliation crawling across my skin. I walked. One step, then another. The whispers followed like a trail. My dress clung, and the lace at the hem grew darker with every movement. The scent of wine mingled with roses from the bouquets lining the aisle. I lifted my chin and walked all the way to him. He took my hands, warm and solid, and squeezed them just once. The officiant cleared his throat. Guests shifted in their seats. The ceremony began as if nothing had happened, but I felt every heartbeat like a hammer against my ribs. When it came time to say my vows, my voice was steady, almost too steady. I meant every word to Liam, but part of me was speaking to Vivian too, a silent vow she would never hear. By the time we kissed, the stain had dried into a rust-colored reminder of who she was and who I was determined to become. After the ceremony, people approached me with wide, sympathetic eyes. They said things like, "You handled that so well, and I'm so sorry she did that to you." Their pity felt heavier than the wine. Tara drifted through the reception like she was the one in a bridal gown. Vivian drank champagne and told stories as if she hadn't just humiliated her stepdaughter in front of 100 people. My father avoided looking at me altogether. Liam held my hand tightly, but he couldn't erase what had happened. Late that night, after the last guest left and the lights dimmed, I sat in the bridal suite still wearing the ruined dress. The lace stuck to my skin where the wine had dried. The mirror showed a woman who had just been married but looked like someone who had fought a war she didn't choose. I touched the stained fabric and felt something harden inside me. I realized that Vivian had not just ruined a dress. She had declared war in the language she knew best. I would not cry. Not for her. Not ever again. Liam knocked softly before stepping inside. His voice was gentle, but I barely heard him. I was staring at my own reflection, memorizing the face of someone who would never again give Vivian the power to humiliate her. I whispered to myself a single sentence I would carry for years. This is the last time you make me small. Outside, the vineyard slept. Inside, I built the first stone of the wall that would one day keep her out. That night alone in the quiet, I stopped being the girl who wanted their approval. I became the woman who would make sure they regretted underestimating me. After the wedding, I stopped answering their calls. At first, there were a few half-hearted voicemails from my father asking how the honeymoon went and a string of chirpy messages from Vivian pretending nothing had happened. I let them pile up and disappear into silence. I packed up the small apartment Liam and I shared in Portland and moved with him to Seattle, where he worked as an engineer at a growing tech firm. I enrolled in an MBA program, something I had planned for years, but had always kept quiet about. For the first time in my life, there was distance between me and the noise of that family. I could breathe without Vivian's voice slipping through every door. Seattle felt like a blank page. The city pulsed with ambition and a kind of anonymity I craved. No one there knew about the wine stain on my wedding dress. No one cared that my stepmother had once ruled every corner of my house. I sat through lectures, spent nights at the library, and let silence rebuild me piece by piece. Vivian sent emails every few months, polished and venomous in the way only she could manage. One line still sits in my memory as sharply as the day it arrived. "Good luck, darling. You'll never surpass Tara." I never replied. I didn't need to. Every hour I spent studying every deal I dissected every sleepless night felt like another quiet refusal. Liam never tried to fix me or silence me. He simply made space. That alone made him the opposite of everything I grew up with. He built me a desk in the corner of our small rental and called it the command center. While Vivian measured love and control, Liam measured it in quiet trust. Those first few years were the slow work of carving out a life that belonged only to me. After finishing my MBA, I started Hale & Co. Designs. It began as a one-woman operation at a kitchen table with thrift store furniture and cheap drafting software. I knew how spaces should feel, even if I couldn't afford to live in them yet. My first clients were small restaurants trying to look like they belonged in glossy magazines. I stayed up through the night sketching layouts and studying lighting angles. I walked to meetings in secondhand suits. I carried portfolios that weighed more than my bank account. Every time Vivian's name appeared in my inbox, I let it sit unopened. Her words had no power over the concrete reality I was building. Liam cheered when I signed my first major contract, a boutique hotel renovation near Pike Place Market. He never asked me to slow down. He never said it was too much. He let me become more than anyone in Salem thought I could. Over time, the work grew. My name started appearing in industry blogs, then in regional magazines, then in national ones. I built a small team, then a studio. 5 years passed in a rhythm that felt like breathing after being underwater too long. Every design I completed was a brick in a wall between me and Vivian's world. I watched Tara's carefully curated life through the periphery of social media. She married a local businessman and became a face at charity galas all surface and shine. Vivian kept posting family photos, the kind meant to say, "Look how perfect we are." I wasn't in any of them. It was exactly how I wanted it. My father stayed silent the way he always had. I did not invite them to anything. I did not share my milestones. I built a life where their absence wasn't a hole, but a clean edge. There were nights I thought about the vineyard, about the wine soaking through silk, and I felt the old rage spark like static. But it no longer owned me. It pushed me forward instead. By the 5th year, Hale & Co. Designs had grown into one of the most sought-after firms in Seattle. We worked with hotels, luxury homes, and commercial developers. I had a team of 30 and a waiting list of clients. I bought my first commercial property, a modest but bright studio with tall windows that reminded me of the light I used to watch from the neighbor's house as a teenager. One afternoon, Vivian sent another email. It began with a line I'll never forget. "I heard you're doing well. Tara just bought a house too." The casual comparison was classic Vivian. I closed the message and went back to reviewing blueprints. That night, Liam found me still working and asked if I ever thought about reaching out. I told him no, he didn't press. He understood something fundamental. My revenge was not loud. It was in the quiet rise they would have to watch from the outside. The years passed like this, steady and deliberate, every step forward another reminder that I didn't need their approval. I was no longer the girl on the porch blowing out a candle alone. I was building something they could not touch. The silence between us wasn't a wound anymore. It was a choice. And in that silence, I grew. By 2022, I had become one of the most sought-after interior designers in Portland. The shift from my small Seattle studio to major West Coast contracts had happened steadily, not in sudden bursts, and that made it sweeter. Each step felt like proof that every silent hour spent working had been worth it. My portfolio now included hotels, museums, and private residences that belonged to people whose names sat on magazine covers. When I drove up to West Hills for the first time to view the property, the realtor called it a modern masterpiece. I called it a promise kept. The house stood at the top of a hill with a clean, minimalist facade that opened into glass walls, every corner of it soaked in light. A floating staircase spiraled from the entryway up to a second floor that overlooked the city skyline. Outside, a vanishing edge pool stretched toward the horizon, reflecting the sky. I walked through the space barefoot, listening to the echo of my steps on polished floors, and knew I was home. Signing the papers felt less like a purchase and more like an arrival. The $6 million price tag didn't scare me. It was a measure of everything I had built. Liam was there when we crossed the threshold, smiling the way he always did when he saw me claim something no one thought I would have. We didn't want children. That was a choice we made early, not out of bitterness, but out of clarity. Our lives revolved around building, creating, moving. The house was large, but it never felt empty. Every wall was a canvas I could shape, every beam of light a silent witness to how far I had come. The day the feature ran in Architectural Digest, my phone buzzed relentlessly. The photos captured the glass walls, the sweeping staircase, the manicured garden, and the pool glinting beneath the Oregon sun. I had been featured before, but this piece was different. It placed me at the center of Portland's design scene. My name was printed on glossy pages. My face smiled from the cover. Vivian found out through Tara, who still lived not far from Salem. I didn't need to hear the details to know how it unfolded. Tara would have shown Vivian the magazine with that practiced smirk, the one she wore whenever she thought she had something to prove. Vivian would have stared at the page, realizing for the first time just how far away I had gone. Not just physically, in every possible way. I didn't think about their reactions often, but that day I let the thought settle like warm sunlight on my shoulders. The girl they ignored now owned a house that sat high above everything they ever touched. Liam built his own world alongside mine. His startup had grown from an idea scrawled on a napkin to a company with investors and a bustling downtown office. We lived parallel lives that fit together without friction. Where my world dealt in spaces and light, his dealt in code and innovation. We met in the middle each evening in the kitchen of the house that felt like a quiet fortress. The house wasn't just a home. It became a base for everything that came next. My firm expanded to multiple cities. I hired creative directors and project managers, allowing me to focus on high-level design and strategy. Invitations to speak at conferences poured in. I walked through airports with the kind of ease that comes from knowing exactly who you are. I also started something I had dreamed about quietly for years. I launched a mentoring program for young women who came from families like mine, women who were told their ambitions were too much or their worth too little. Once a month, I hosted workshops in the open gallery of my firm. We sat in a circle surrounded by boards and models. I told them that the silence they carried could be turned into something powerful. I saw in their faces the same look I used to wear. The need to be seen, the fear of taking up space, the stubborn hope underneath it all. That mission became as important as my design work. Vivian would never understand that kind of legacy. Her world had always been about control. Mine was about giving people back their choices. In the evenings when the sun dropped low and light stretched across the glass walls, Liam and I would sit by the pool with a bottle of wine and talk about nothing and everything. The city glimmered below us. Some nights I thought about Salem, about the house where I used to sit on the porch waiting for someone who never came. Those memories no longer stung. They simply existed like shadows at the edge of something brighter. Success wasn't loud in those moments. It was quiet, steady, solid beneath my feet. Tara posted photos online of her curated life. Charity luncheons, designer dresses. Vivian appeared in some of them, her hair perfectly styled, her smile practiced. I didn't appear in any of their stories, and that absence was its own kind of power. They would have to read about me in magazines and see me on stages. They would never again have the chance to make me small in person. The invitations to family gatherings had stopped long ago. Vivian probably still assumed I carried some bitter grudge. She was wrong. What I carried wasn't bitterness. It was distance. It was the kind of clarity that comes when you've built something so strong no one from your past can shake it. I remember one afternoon standing at the edge of the pool looking down at the reflection of the house and the endless stretch of the city beyond. I thought about the night on the roof when I was 15, whispering promises to myself. This was the answer to that promise. Not the house itself, but the freedom it represented. Freedom from their approval. Freedom from their cruelty. Freedom to choose. A friend from the industry once asked why I stayed in Portland when I could live anywhere. The answer was simple. Portland was close enough for them to see me rise, but far enough that they could never touch it. I didn't need revenge in the traditional sense. I just needed them to know that the world they tried to keep me out of now belonged to me. As 2022 came to a close, my firm broke revenue records. Liam's company announced a new partnership, and the mentoring program doubled in size. I walked into the new year with the certainty of someone who had built everything brick by brick. Somewhere in Salem, Vivian was still living in the echo chamber she had built for herself. I didn't need to look back to know she was watching from afar. The woman she once called a burden now lived in a house that overlooked the world. I didn't smile often at the thought, but when I did, it felt like the cleanest breath I had ever taken. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon in April 2025. The kind of afternoon that made the house glow like it had its own heartbeat. The light poured through the glass walls, stretching across the polished floors. I had just finished a call with one of my project leads about a new commercial contract in Los Angeles when the soft chime of the security system cut through the air. That sound had become routine over the years. Deliveries, landscapers, maintenance crews. But this time, the tone carried something different. The gate camera activated and the image appeared on the screen mounted near the kitchen. I froze before the emotion could catch up. Standing at the front gate was Vivian Hale. She looked smaller than I remembered, though her posture tried to mimic the old performance. She wore a long coat that hung awkwardly around her shoulders. Her hair was still blonde, but no longer crisp, the roots showing gray like a truth she could no longer polish away. Behind her, parked haphazardly on the street, was a car I didn't recognize. She pressed the intercom once-twice and then leaned toward it. Her voice came through the speaker rougher now. "Ember, please. It's me. I need to talk to you. We need your help." The word we hit like a cold draft. I didn't have to ask who she meant. I'd heard enough through distant circles to piece the story together. Tara had lost everything investing in a chain of luxury spas that collapsed within 2 years. My father Richard retired without significant savings, having poured what he had into Tara's ventures. Their world of polished appearances and photo ops had cracked wide open. Now Vivian stood at my gate like a woman who no longer owned the ground beneath her. I stepped closer to the monitor and studied her face. The woman who had once stood in a vineyard with a glass of red wine smiling as she poured it over my wedding dress was now standing on the sidewalk waiting for me to let her in. It was almost poetic. A security guard walked into frame. He gave me a look through the camera waiting for instructions. I didn't answer immediately. Instead, I let my hand rest against the cool edge of the counter. I remembered the sound of that wine spilling. I remembered the weight of the fabric against my skin. I remembered every time Vivian reminded me that I was less than Tara. The memory didn't hurt anymore. It felt like a blade that had dulled from being sharpened too often. Vivian pressed the intercom again. "Ember, please. We are family. We need you." Her voice cracked on the last word. Family. The word she used only when it served her. I tilted my head slightly, almost curious. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel pity. I felt a kind of clarity that can only come from watching the past arrive at your doorstep stripped of its armor. My father wasn't there, but I knew where he was in this story. Probably sitting somewhere letting Vivian do the talking like he always had. Tara must have been the one who pushed Vivian to come. Tara never liked facing the consequences of her own choices. She preferred to let Vivian clean up her messes. Now they were all standing behind one gate, and I was standing inside a house built from everything they said I could never have. The security guard spoke softly. "Do you want me to approach her?" I shook my head and pressed the intercom button. My voice came out smooth, steady, colder than it used to be. "Vivian, I hear you." She stepped closer to the speaker like someone catching a faint signal. "Ember, please. We've lost everything. Tara's business. The house. Your father's retirement. We have nowhere else to go." I watched her hands tremble slightly. This was not the woman who laughed at me in a crowd. This was someone who had finally met the limits of her own performance. I could almost hear the echo of her voice from 10 years earlier. "Tragic, isn't it?" I remembered the stain on my dress, the way she held the glass like a trophy. That moment lived in my spine. But now I held the glass and she was on the other side of the gate. For a long moment, I didn't say anything. The silence stretched between us like a rope drawn tight. She filled it with words. "We are family. We can fix this together. Please, I need your help." I exhaled slowly. The part of me that once wanted her approval no longer existed. I turned slightly enough to see the pool outside. The sunlight danced on the water. The woman who used to feel small had disappeared in that reflection years ago. What remained was someone who could make a choice without apology. I pressed the intercom again. "Vivian, go home." Her face twisted as if the words stung. "Please, don't do this. We have nowhere else. Tara is devastated. Your father is—" She faltered, searching for something that might work on me. "He's ashamed." I didn't believe that for a second. Richard had never carried enough weight to be ashamed of anything. I said nothing. The guard waited. I let the pause hang there because it belonged to me. For decades, Vivian had controlled rooms with silence. Now the silence belonged to me. I turned away from the monitor, my hand brushing the smooth edge of the counter. Then I gave the order. "Keep the gate closed. Escort them off the property." The guard nodded and stepped out of frame. Vivian pressed the intercom again, but the sound was cut short as the system locked. I walked to the living room window where I could see the edge of the gate from a distance. Vivian was still standing there, shrinking as the guard approached her. She didn't scream. She didn't fight. She simply stood there looking up at the house, at the glass walls, at everything she had tried to make me believe I would never have. There was something almost fragile in her posture, but it didn't move me. It only confirmed what I already knew. The past was outside. I was inside. The gate was exactly where it belonged. As the car pulled away from the curb, I watched through the glass until it disappeared down the hill. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I simply stood there steady. 10 years earlier, she had poured wine on my wedding dress to make sure I knew my place. Now I had shown her exactly where her place was. In that quiet room filled with light, I felt the sharp edges of old pain settle into something solid. Not revenge in the loud way. Not screaming. Just a locked gate, a steady breath, and the weight of my own power. It was the kind of victory people like Vivian never understood. The kind that doesn't need to be announced. It simply exists. And she had just seen it with her own eyes. The invitation went out 3 days later. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't sentimental. It was a formal note written by my legal assistant on company letterhead and sent to Vivian's personal email. I called it a family meeting, but it was never about reconciliation. It was about control, and this time it was mine. The meeting was set for a Saturday afternoon, 3 o'clock in the main sitting room of the house. I made sure the security cameras covered every angle of the space. My attorney joined on a video call from his office downtown, his voice piped through a speaker on the table. It was deliberate. Every move I made that day was calculated. If they came to ask, I would make sure they left understanding that the past wasn't something I had forgotten. It was something I had recorded. Vivian and Tara arrived 15 minutes late. Typical. They walked into the sitting room as though they had been summoned to an estate reading. Tara wore a coat too expensive for someone who had filed for bankruptcy 2 months earlier. Vivian's makeup was heavier than the last time I saw her at the gate, as if layers of foundation could rebuild her sense of power. I didn't bother to stand. I sat at the head of the long oak table, a glass of water in front of me, my laptop already open. The lawyer's voice greeted them through the speaker. "Good afternoon." They barely glanced at it. Vivian sat down across from me, Tara beside her. Vivian folded her hands like she used to at the dinner table when she wanted to look composed. Ember. Vivian began smoothing the front of her coat. "I'm glad you agreed to talk. This is still family. We can find a way to help each other." I said nothing. I let her fill the silence because that was how she used to control me. But I had learned to let silence sit until it belonged to me. Tara shifted in her seat, glancing around the room. She was used to being on home turf. This wasn't hers. "You have done so well," Vivian continued, the words stretched thin around something sharp. "Your house, your company, your life. We're proud of you." Her smile didn't touch her eyes. "And that's why we're here. We've had some setbacks. Tara's business, and your father's retirement. It's difficult right now. You have everything. We're only asking for a small portion, a little help for family. That's what families do." The audacity was almost elegant in its predictability. I looked at her hands as she spoke. They trembled slightly, but she covered it well. Tara leaned forward, her voice low but practiced. "We're not asking for charity, Ember. We just need support to get through this. We'll pay it back." "Support," I repeated slowly, letting the word roll across the room. "Like the support you gave me at my wedding." Vivian's mouth tightened. "That was years ago." "Yes," I said. 10 years. I turned the laptop toward them. One click. The large wall screen behind me flickered to life. The sound came first, a chorus of gasps and whispers. The image followed, a bright summer day, a vineyard, a white dress. Vivian stepping forward with a glass of red wine. The video captured everything. The tilt of her wrist, the arc of the liquid spilling, the laughter that followed. The camera angle was perfect because one of the guests had posted it online years ago and I had saved it. For a moment, the only sound in the room was Vivian's breath catching. The lawyer on the call cleared his throat softly but said nothing. Tara's mouth opened, then closed again. She looked from the screen to her mother and back. Vivian's face drained of color. She gripped the edge of the table, her composure slipping like wet paint. "You," I said quietly, "made sure everyone in that vineyard saw me bleed without a wound. You wanted to humiliate me in front of everyone I loved. You wanted to make sure I never forgot my place." Vivian's voice came out thin. "That was a mistake. No," I interrupted. "That was the moment you lost any right to call me family." The video looped again. The sound of her laugh filled the room like a ghost. She flinched when she heard it. Tara whispered something I couldn't catch. I leaned back in my chair and let them watch themselves. 10 years. It had taken 10 years for this moment to arrive. Vivian's hand shot out to stop the video, but the controls were on my side. I let it play a third time. I wanted the sound of her laugh to be the only thing she heard when she thought about asking me for anything ever again. Finally, I hit pause. The image froze on the exact second the wine hit the silk. She tried to recover. "Ember, that was the past. We're here because we need you now. You have everything. We have nothing. I'm asking you as family." I tilted my head. "Family? Interesting choice of word. Because when I walked down that aisle covered in wine, I don't remember you using that word." Tara slammed her hands on the table. "Enough with the dramatics. You've built this perfect life. You're rich. You can help us. Why won't you just do it?" I met her gaze. "Because this is what accountability looks like." Vivian's shoulders sagged. She turned her palms upward like she was offering me something. "Please, we have nothing left." I leaned back slowly, my chair sliding against the polished floor. "That's not my problem," the lawyer spoke for the first time. "Mrs. Hale, Ms. Hale, As previously stated in the legal notice, you received my client is under no obligation to provide financial assistance. Any further contact must be through legal counsel. Vivian blinked as if she had heard a language she didn't understand. You'd let your own family starve. I almost laughed at the absurdity of it. You let your stepdaughter stand alone on her wedding day with a ruined dress and humiliation dripping from every seam. You let years go by without a single call that wasn't about Tara. You made your choices. I made mine. Tara muttered something about how I'd always wanted to be the victim. I didn't bother to respond. The cameras were recording everything, every word, every glance, every plea. Vivian's breath hitched. She stood slowly, then sank to her knees beside the table. For a moment, the room went utterly still. Tara stared at her wide-eyed, as if she couldn't believe her mother would bend like this. Vivian's voice came out raw. "Please, I'm begging you. We have nowhere else to go." I looked down at her, not as a daughter, not as a victim, as the woman she never thought I'd become. I said nothing for a long time. Then I smoothed my jacket and walked to the door. "You should leave," I said. Vivian stayed on her knees. Tara finally grabbed her arm and pulled her up. They both looked smaller than they ever had, framed by glass walls and light. Vivian wiped at her face. Tara stared at the paused image on the screen at the frozen moment where their power ended and mine began. As they walked toward the exit, the lawyer's voice echoed from the speaker. "This meeting is recorded and logged. Any future requests should follow legal protocol." The door closed behind them with a soft click. I stood alone in the center of the room and let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. 10 years of silence had led to this. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to scream. All I had to do was press play. That was the public exposure I had waited for. Not a crowd, not a courtroom. Just a table, a recording, and the undeniable truth of what they had done. Outside the window, the city stretched below the hill. Somewhere out there, Vivian's world was crumbling. Mine stood firm. The moment I shut off the screen, the house felt lighter, like the walls themselves understood. I wasn't the girl in the white dress anymore. I was the woman who controlled the room. The past had finally faced the future, and the future won. 2 weeks after that meeting, the paper trail began to take shape. My lawyer drafted a formal notice of restricted contact. It was clean, precise, and delivered by certified mail. Vivian Hale. Tara Hale and Richard Hale were prohibited from coming within 200 yards of any of my personal or business properties. They were also barred from making direct contact through phone, email, or any third party except legal counsel. The language was firm but not emotional. It didn't need to be. I had spent years learning that power wasn't about volume. It was about boundaries drawn with absolute clarity. Once the letters were sent, silence followed. Not the uneasy silence of my childhood, but the kind of quiet that belonged entirely to me. I thought that might be the end of it. It wasn't. The video from the confrontation leaked within a week. I hadn't posted it, but someone on my legal team suspected Tara had tried to spin the story to a mutual acquaintance, hoping to play the victim. It backfired spectacularly. The footage of Vivian kneeling in my sitting room spread through Salem's social circles like wildfire. It was passed between people who had once attended her charity luncheons and danced at Tara's wedding receptions. By the end of the week, Vivian was no longer the queen of those circles. She was their cautionary tale. Tara's bankruptcy filing became public record. It was humiliating and loud in the way gossip always is in a small state like Oregon. Vivian tried to sell the story to a few sympathetic friends, painting herself as a mother begging for mercy from a cold daughter. But in a world where everyone had already seen the video of her laughing at my wedding, her words landed flat. Richard remained almost invisible through it all, just as he had through my childhood. That more than anything told me he had learned nothing. Within a month, Vivian listed her house. It sold quickly but at a loss. The money disappeared almost immediately into unpaid debts. Tara's credit was a ruin. The spa chain collapse had taken everything. Meanwhile, I moved forward. Hale and Co-Designs expanded to another city. Liam's company secured its largest round of funding yet. The contrast between our lives stretched so wide that even the gossipers stopped trying to connect the threads. Vivian tried to bypass the legal restrictions once. She sent a message through a mutual acquaintance from Salem, someone I barely knew. It was a short note, polite on the surface. "Your mother would like to speak to you. Just one conversation." The reply from my lawyer went out within the hour. Any contact must go through legal counsel. There was no second attempt. I never blocked the news or muted their names. I didn't need to. Their downfall unfolded in plain sight, and I watched with the same detached calm I used to imagine for years when I was still that girl on the roof, whispering promises into the night. People they had once held close began to step back. The invitations to parties stopped. The whispered conversations shifted. They weren't admired anymore. They were pitied. And nothing corrodes a carefully built social identity faster than pity. The irony was almost too neat. 10 years ago, they had made me small in front of their world. Now, their world made them small in return. But I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The sound of that gate closing on the day Vivian showed up uninvited was all the victory I ever needed. In September, I attended a large charity gala in downtown Portland. It was one of the city's biggest fundraising events of the year, held at a historic building with chandeliers that glittered like captured stars. Hale & Co. was one of the sponsors. The event raised funds for programs supporting women leaving controlling family situations. It was something close to my heart, though few in the room knew why. I wore a black silk gown that caught the light in a way that made the photographers follow me as soon as I stepped out of the car. Liam walked beside me in a tailored suit, his hand resting lightly against mine. Inside, the air hummed with quiet wealth. People moved through the space with practiced grace, the kind Vivian used to master. When I stepped onto the stage to give my short speech, the room quieted. My voice carried easily through the microphones. For many women, I said the hardest walls to climb are not built from stone or concrete. They're built from the people who say they love you. I let the words settle. But walls can be climbed, or better yet, walked away from. And sometimes what's waiting on the other side isn't just freedom, it's power. The applause rolled through the room like a wave. Cameras flashed. Somewhere out there, probably in a smaller, dimmer room, Vivian would see these pictures online. I wondered if she would recognize the woman in the black gown as the same girl she once drenched in wine. The weeks after the gala only cemented the divide. Vivian and Tara faded from the circles they had ruled for so long. They had no house, no business, and fewer friends. Richard stayed quiet, perhaps pretending the problem would disappear if he looked away long enough. It never did. People like him mistook silence for safety. Every so often someone would mention Vivian's name in passing at an event, their voices soft and speculative. I would nod politely and change the subject. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. The truth was out there for anyone who cared to look. I did receive one last indirect message through an old high school acquaintance of Tara's. It was a thinly veiled plea. Vivian was unwell. She was living in a small rental far from the country clubs and charity dinners she once loved. Tara had moved back in with her. They were struggling. They wanted to talk. My lawyer sent the same reply as before. All communication must go through legal counsel. I sat by the pool the night after that message arrived. The water reflected the city lights below the hill. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet I had once begged for as a child. Liam sat beside me, handing me a glass of sparkling water. He didn't need to ask what I was thinking. 10 years ago, Vivian would have called me selfish for not bending. But the truth was simpler. I wasn't punishing them. I was protecting myself. Boundaries were never about cruelty. They were about survival. The power I held now wasn't loud or showy. It was in the calmness of my breath, the steady way my world held together, even as theirs fell apart. And for the first time, I didn't feel a flicker of guilt. Vivian's laugh at my wedding had been her victory. The locked gate, the video, the legal notices, and the unshakable quiet of my life were mine. If the woman who once humiliated you knelt before you years later begging for help, would you forgive her or let silence answer for you? I already knew my choice. The silence was louder than anything I could have said. The idea for the foundation had been growing in the quiet corners of my mind for years, long before Vivian showed up at my gate. It began the day I sat in a rented apartment in Seattle, staring at the acceptance email from my MBA program with no family to call. It grew stronger when I signed the mortgage papers for the West Hills house and realized I had become the kind of woman 15-year-old me had whispered about on a rooftop. By the spring after the confrontation, I had turned that idea into a plan. $5 million. That was the seed. The Hale Foundation would exist to support young women trying to break free from financial control inside their own families. It would give them scholarships, housing grants, legal support, and most importantly, a network of people who would never ask them to shrink themselves. It would be everything I once needed but didn't have. The launch night arrived in late October. Portland's autumn air had turned crisp, and the house was draped in warm gold lights. Strings of bulbs wrapped around the trees that lined the garden, and soft music floated through the air from a small live quartet on the terrace. I walked through the rooms before the guests arrived, taking in the transformation. This house had seen power plays pleas and legal boundaries, but tonight it would be filled with something entirely different. Laughter, hope, new beginnings. Liam stood at the bar setting out glasses while my team from the foundation checked their lists. My closest friends moved through the space with the ease of people who belonged. That was the point. The first guests began arriving just after sunset. There was a mix of faces women I had mentored through my program industry colleagues and people who had quietly supported me as I built my life. Many of them had their own stories, different in detail but painfully familiar in shape. Stories of being told they were too much, too loud, too ambitious. Tonight, no one had to make themselves smaller. I wore a simple cream dress, elegant but quiet. I wanted the night to belong to the foundation, not to me. As I walked through the crowd, conversations lifted and swelled like warm air. There were no forced smiles, no hidden landmines, just people who had chosen to be part of this. I gave a short speech near the pool where the city lights reflected against the water. For a long time, I said I believed my voice wasn't enough. I believed silence was survival. But silence can also be power when we build something from it. This foundation is for every woman who has been told she can't stand on her own. This is proof she can. The applause wasn't polite. It was loud, real, full of something I had rarely heard in my childhood home. Belief. I felt it vibrate through my chest as if the house itself was exhaling after years of holding its breath. Inside the house, my team projected photos on the walls. They weren't of me. They were of the women who would receive the first round of grants. One young woman in particular caught my attention. Her name was Maya, 23 years old. She had left a controlling household with nothing but a part-time job and a scholarship she almost lost when her father refused to let her accept it. She had found our program 2 years earlier. Now she was finishing law school. She stood near the table in a navy suit, her eyes shining with the same determined fire I recognized in old photos of myself. When she hugged me, it wasn't a polite hug. It was fierce grounding. "You changed my life," she whispered. "No," I told her quietly. "You did. I just gave you the space to stand in your own power." As the night went on, conversations deepened. People shared their stories without shame. There was laughter, the kind that rolled through the air like soft music. It didn't sound anything like the stiff dinners at Vivian's house years ago, where every word was measured and every gesture judged. This was what chosen family felt like, people who saw each other fully. But outside the fence line, reality still lingered. Vivian was there. I saw her just after 9, standing at the edge of the property. She was wrapped in an oversized coat again, the same way she had been that first day at the gate. She didn't come to the door. She knew she wasn't allowed. The security team saw her before I did, but I told them not to remove her unless she crossed the line. She stood there for nearly 20 minutes looking through the iron fence at the lights. The laughter, the people who filled the space she could never touch again. It should have felt like triumph, but it wasn't triumph. It was clarity. She had spent years teaching me that family was a currency she controlled. Now she was outside a circle that no longer recognized her authority. She had chosen to burn bridges the day she poured wine down my dress. She was just now realizing how permanent that choice was. I didn't step outside. I didn't need to. She watched me from the shadows as I laughed with Liam as Maya gave a speech about her future as friends clinked their glasses. She wasn't part of this world anymore, and I didn't have to say a word. Maya's speech was raw and honest. She talked about walking away from a home that didn't love her enough to let her grow. She talked about the first time she received an email from the foundation offering legal support and a grant. She talked about standing on her own feet. By the time she finished, half the room was wiping at their eyes. When she stepped down, I hugged her again. She reminded me of myself in the years before I built this house, before the quiet became my strength. After the speeches, people lingered on the terrace. A warm breeze moved through the garden. The city spread out below us, lights flickering like the world was breathing with us. Liam wrapped an arm around my waist. "You built this," he said softly. I looked at the crowd. "No. We built this." Vivian was gone by the time the last guests left. I saw her footprints on the gravel near the gate when I walked the perimeter with security. They were faint, already fading. When I returned to the living room, a few of my closest friends were still there helping stack glasses and laughing over leftover desserts. These were people who had walked beside me not because they shared my blood, but because they shared my vision. Chosen family. I felt the warmth settle into my bones. It wasn't the sharp rush of revenge. It was the steady hum of a life reclaimed. I thought of my 12-year-old self sitting on the porch with a cupcake of my 25-year-old self in a ruined dress of the woman who pressed her palm against the gate and told security not to let Vivian in. All those versions of me had led to this night, this circle, this power. As I locked the doors and turned off the lights, the house seemed to hum softly, not with loneliness, but with fullness. Outside, the night was still. Inside, the air was warm. For the first time in a long time, I understood that revenge wasn't the point. The point was to build something better. And I had. The drive to Salem was quiet, the kind of quiet that used to suffocate me, but now felt like a warm, measured breath. I hadn't been down this stretch of highway in years. The last time I was a 20-year-old student on a Greyhound bus staring out the window, promising myself I would never look back. But now, with the morning sun cutting through the mist and my hands resting lightly on the steering wheel of a car I bought with my own name, my own work, it felt different. This wasn't a return. It was a passing through. Salem still looked the same in the way small towns do, stubbornly clinging to their shape, no matter how many years slip by. The same line of old maples leaned over the streets. The same cracked sidewalks led to the same neat houses. But the house I grew up in was no longer ours. I knew that before I even turned down the block. The for sale sign that had once leaned tired and sun-bleached against the lawn was long gone. A new family lived there now. I pulled over across the street and let the engine idle. The house hadn't changed much from the outside. A new coat of paint, a different front door, a few flower beds. But it was still the same shape. The same roof I used to climb onto at night, pressing my knees to the shingles as I stared at other people's windows, imagining what it might feel like to belong somewhere. A man in a flannel jacket came out onto the porch, carrying a cup of coffee. A woman followed him laughing about something I couldn't hear through the car window. Two children chased each other down the front steps, their sneakers slapping against the pavement, their laughter spilling into the morning air. They had no idea what this house used to hold. They didn't know about the cold silences at the dinner table, the empty seats at graduations, the birthdays that were never celebrated. They didn't know about the way Vivian controlled every inch of this space, how Tara's trophies lined the mantel while my achievements sat buried in a kitchen drawer. They didn't know about the night I promised myself I would never come back. And they didn't need to. Watching them felt strange, but not painful. I expected a rush of anger or some deep ache, but instead there was only a stillness I hadn't known before. The house didn't belong to Vivian anymore. It didn't belong to me either. It belonged to them, and that was exactly how it should be. Whatever had happened here was over. The walls had absorbed it, the floors had carried it, and time had swept it away. I sat there for a few minutes, letting the sound of their laughter filter through the glass. It didn't hurt. It didn't heal anything either. It just existed, a quiet fact, like the sunlight warming the dashboard. Then I put the car in gear and drove away without looking back at the porch. The road unspooled ahead of me like a thread I no longer needed to follow. The closer I got to Portland, the lighter my chest felt. The skyline came into view with its mix of modern glass and old brick, the city that had become mine. When I turned up the winding road to West Hills, I lowered the windows. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of rain. I drove past manicured hedges and houses set back from the road until I reached the gate. The security system recognized my car and swung open with a soft hydraulic hum. It still felt strange sometimes to think this was my home. Not because I doubted I had earned it, but because the girl who grew up in that Salem house could never have imagined this kind of power belonged to her. I parked in the driveway and stepped out into the quiet. The house rose up behind me, glass and steel, catching the light like it had its own pulse. The water in the pool shimmered against the pale stone. For years, I had dreamed of a life like this. Now, it simply existed around me, steady, real mine. Inside, the house smelled faintly of cedar and citrus. Liam was in the kitchen pouring coffee into 2 mugs. He always left the windows cracked just enough for the morning air to weave through the rooms. I slipped off my shoes, letting my feet touch the warm wood floors. It still amazed me how grounding something so simple could feel. "You went," he said when he saw me. I nodded. "Yeah, I went." He didn't ask for details. He never did. Liam had learned a long time ago that silence between us wasn't a void. It was trust. I took the coffee he offered and leaned against the counter. "How did it feel?" he asked. I thought about the porch, the children laughing, the new paint on the door. "Like it doesn't belong to me anymore," I said. He studied my face for a moment, then stepped closer and wrapped his arms around me from behind. His chin rested lightly on my shoulder. His warmth was steady grounding. "Do you regret anything?" I let the question linger. For a long time, regret had lived in me like a shadow. Regret for the childhood I didn't get. Regret for the family I tried so hard to earn. Regret for the tears I swallowed in silence. But standing there in my kitchen, surrounded by a life I built without their help, I felt none of it. Not a thing I said quietly. I built my own family. He squeezed my hand gently. I could feel his smile against my hair. Later that evening, the house filled with the familiar hum of chosen people. My closest friends arrived for dinner, the same group that had stood beside me at the foundation launch. Maya was there, too fresh from her bar exam results, her smile wide and untamed. She hugged me at the door with the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with bloodlines and everything to do with shared understanding. The long dining table was set with simple white plates and candles that cast soft golden pools of light across the room. Someone put on music, something quiet and steady. Laughter rolled easily between the walls, the kind that comes when no one is performing. I walked through the space and caught fragments of conversations. Liam talking about a new project. Maya explaining how she wanted to give back to the foundation. Someone else telling a story about their first apartment. No one mentioned Vivian. No one mentioned the past. For years, I had thought victory would feel like thunder. Loud, triumphant. A roar that shook the ground. But it didn't. It felt like this. Soft laughter. Steady light. A dinner table full of people who chose to be here. When the last plates were cleared, I slipped away from the noise for a moment and walked down the long glass hallway. The city stretched out below like a map of constellations, every light a story I didn't need to control. I placed my hand against the cool surface of the glass. My reflection stared back at me. Not the girl in the ruined wedding dress, not the teenager on the roof, not the invisible daughter sitting on the porch with a melting cupcake. Just me. Vivian was still out there somewhere. Tara, too. Maybe their lives had shrunk to fit the choices they made. Maybe they still talked about me behind closed doors, blaming me for everything that went wrong. But their world no longer touched mine. And that was enough. I walked outside to the terrace. The night air was cool against my skin. The sound of the pool water trickling over the edge filled the quiet. Liam joined me after a few minutes, sliding an arm around my waist. "Thinking about them?" he asked. I shook my head, thinking about how far I've come. We stood there together looking at the city. No tears, no rage. Just a quiet sense of balance settling into place. A decade ago, I thought justice had to be loud. I thought it would come in a single explosive moment. But real justice isn't always fireworks. Sometimes it's walking through your house in the dark, barefoot on warm floors, knowing no one can take this away from you. It's the quiet after years of chaos. It's the certainty that your boundaries are solid and your peace belongs entirely to you. I walked back inside, the faint music wrapping around me like a familiar blanket. My friends were still laughing, their voices echoing off the high ceilings. Maya caught my eye and smiled. For a second, I saw my younger self reflected in her, and it hit me just how much had changed. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was living. When the night wound down and everyone left, the house fell silent again. But it wasn't the silence of that Salem porch. It was a silence built on strength, not absence. I walked down the hallway one more time, stopping in front of the glass wall. The city lights flickered like a promise. No apologies. No ghosts. Just me standing in everything I built. This was the ending I never thought I'd have when I was that girl who whispered to herself in the dark. Not a fairy tale, not revenge wrapped in fire. Just the quiet victory of a woman who learned that sometimes the loudest thing you can say is nothing at all.